A senior cruise steward slapped a pregnant black woman across the face in front of hundreds of witnesses. The crime? Refusing to tighten her life vest over her baby bump. Steward Karen Foster felt powerful. She filed a false report claiming the victim was aggressive. What she didn't know? The quiet man sitting next to that woman was Marcus Thorne, billionaire CEO and owner of the entire cruise line. One phone call later, Karen was fired, criminally charged, and became a global symbol of workplace racism. The cruise line? Forced into a $50 million overhaul. This gripping fictional drama explores how one slap triggered a corporate revolution. Inspired by real themes of prejudice and accountability, watch the moment power shifted forever. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. What happens when a simple cruise turns into a battleground of prejudice and power? On Sapphire Seas Cruises Voyage 712, a senior steward, Karen, believing she holds all the authority, commits an unforgivable act against a pregnant black woman in a standard stateroom. She unleashes a torrent of condescension that ends in a shocking slap heard around the hall. But what she doesn't know is that the calm, unassuming man sitting next to the woman isn't just a husband. He's the billionaire owner of the entire cruise line. This isn't just a story about an unruly employee. It's about a hidden king watching his kingdom fail its most vulnerable and the life-altering storm of karma that is about to be unleashed in the middle of the ocean. The air inside the Serene Star. On Sapphire Seas Cruises Voyage 712 from Port Everglades to the Caribbean, was a familiar mix of recycled oxygen, a faint scent of sea salt, and the cloying smell of stale coffee. For Dr. Aliyah Hayes, 6 months into a precious, hard-won pregnancy, this 7-day journey was a necessary ordeal. It was their baby moon, a final quiet escape before their world would be joyfully upended by the arrival of their first child. She settled into stateroom 7214. She had insisted on this standard room so her husband could be comfortable in the main space, allowing her to lean on him and feel secure. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, sat beside her with a practiced ease that belied his stature in the world. To anyone glancing, he was just a tall, well-built man in a simple gray hoodie and jeans. His face was calm as he scrolled through a market report on his phone. There was no flash, no entourage. The platinum gleam of his simple wedding band was the only hint of a life beyond the ordinary. For Marcus, traveling in a standard stateroom on his own cruise line was a non-negotiable ritual, a secret shopper experience that kept him grounded and his multi-billion-dollar company honest. He called it tasting his own cooking. Today, however, he wasn't looking for service flaws. He was just a husband taking his wife on vacation. Aliyah shifted, trying to find a comfortable position for her swollen ankles. She was a pediatric surgeon, a woman accustomed to grueling 16-hour shifts, life-or-death decisions, and maintaining grace under unimaginable pressure. But pregnancy was a different kind of endurance test. She caught the attention of a passing young cabin steward with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Leo. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Could I possibly have a small pillow for my lower back and perhaps a bottle of water?" "Of course, ma'am," Leo said with a genuine smile. "Let me see what I can find for you right away. Congratulations, by the way." He nodded respectfully toward her belly, before hurrying toward the main galley. A moment later, a different figure appeared in the hallway. She was an older woman with blonde hair pulled into a severe, tight bun, and a name tag that read, Karen Foster. Her face was a mask of strained professionalism. Her lips were a thin, unsmiling line. Karen was a senior steward with over 20 years of service. This tenure had calcified her patience into a brittle shell. "Your bag needs to go completely under the bed in front of you," she said. Her voice sharp, not looking at Aliyah, but at the small tote bag near her feet. Aliyah glanced down. The bag, containing her prenatal vitamins, a book, and a snack, was already mostly under the bed. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, nudging it further with her foot. "It's just difficult to bend over right now." Karen's eyes flickered to Aliyah's pregnant stomach, and a flicker of something, not sympathy, but annoyance, crossed her features. "Maritime Authority regulations are not optional, ma'am. All the way under, not halfway. The cabin isn't secure until it is." Marcus lowered his phone, his calm expression tightening slightly. "She's pushing it as far as it will go. It's not obstructing the hallway. Karen's gaze shifted to Marcus, dismissing him instantly as just another passenger in a hoodie. Sir, I am in charge of safety in this cabin. The bag needs to be fully stowed. Her tone was final. With a sigh, Aliyah leaned forward, a wave of dizziness washing over her as she contorted her body to shove the bag the final inch. She sat back up, breathing heavily, and placed a hand on her belly. Marcus put a comforting hand on her knee, his thumb drawing slow circles. He caught Karen's eye, his expression unreadable, before she turned and stalked away without another word. Leo returned a few minutes later with a pillow and 2 bottles of water. Sorry for the delay, he said warmly. Here you go. Let me know if you need anything else at all. Thank you so much, Leo, Aliyah said, her gratitude palpable. The contrast between his kindness and Karen's hostility was stark. As the ship maneuvered to leave the port, the pre-departure tension seemed to dissipate. Aliyah leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, closing her eyes. She was trying to let the earlier encounter go, to chalk it up to someone having a bad day. In her line of work, she dealt with stressed, terrified parents and sick children. She was an expert at de-escalation and empathy. She could extend that grace to a ship steward, but Karen Foster was not just having a bad day. She was a woman marinating in a bitter stew of personal resentments. A recent divorce had decimated her finances, and she'd been passed over for a promotion to cabin manager, a role given to a younger, more energetic colleague. In her mind, the world was cheating her, and her prejudice, long simmering beneath a veneer of corporate training, was beginning to boil over. She saw Aliyah, a poised, eloquent black woman, clearly well off enough for a vacation even if she was sitting in a standard cabin, and felt an irrational spike of animosity. Later on the first day of the journey, during the beverage service, the trouble reignited. When the cart reached their stateroom, Karen was serving. Something to drink? She asked, her voice clipped, addressing the passenger across the hall. When she got to Aliyah, she didn't even make eye contact. Aliyah asked, "Could I please have some cranberry juice and another bottle of water?" Karen paused, her hand hovering over the cans. "The water will be an extra charge now that we are post-service," Marcus interjected, his voice still even. "We're in the middle of the beverage service and my wife is pregnant. I'm sure you can make an exception for a bottle of water." Karen finally looked at him, her eyes cold. "Company policy, sir. 1 complimentary beverage. Water is included. If you want a second bottle, you'll have to purchase it." She was being deliberately obtuse, weaponizing a petty rule. Leo, who was working the other side of the cart, overheard. He quickly grabbed a bottle from his side. "It's no problem at all," he said, handing it directly to Aliyah with an apologetic glance. "Here you go, ma'am. Stay hydrated." Karen shot Leo a look of pure venom, a silent promise of a write-up later. She slapped a plastic cup of cranberry juice onto Aliyah's tray table, with enough force to make it slosh. "Enjoy your cruise," she said, the words dripping with insincere courtesy before pushing the cart aggressively down the hall. Marcus watched her go, his jaw tight. He squeezed Aliyah's hand. "Are you okay, baby?" Aliyah nodded, though a knot of anxiety was forming in her stomach. It wasn't just rudeness. It felt personal, targeted. She had faced racism before, the subtle slights in the hospital boardroom, the surprised looks from patients when they realized she was the lead surgeon. But this felt different. It was cruder, more blatant, and happening on a ship in the middle of the ocean where there was no escape. She whispered to Marcus, "I just want to get there. Let's not make a scene." Marcus nodded, his protective instincts warring with his desire to honor his wife's wish for peace. He knew the inner workings of his company. He had personally overseen the drafting of Sapphire Seas' Customer Bill of Rights, which explicitly stated that crew members were empowered to provide extra amenities to passengers with medical needs, including pregnancy. Karen wasn't just being rude. She was actively violating the very spirit of the company he had built. He made a mental note of her name, Karen Foster, the voyage number, the date. The reckoning would come, but he would not allow it to spoil this trip for Aliyah. He would handle it quietly, professionally, after they docked. He had no idea how wrong he was. The situation was far from over. In fact, the light chop was about to become a full-blown Category 5 hurricane. and they were sitting directly in its path. The first day of the journey continued, just before departure, with the mandatory safety drill, muster drill. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker, instructing all passengers to proceed to their emergency assembly stations and follow the directions of the cabin crew. Aliyah and Marcus's station was one of the main theaters, the Apollo Theater. This was Karen Foster's domain, a time when her authority was absolute. She was making a final sweep of the theater with sharp, aggressive movements. When she reached row 34, their section, her eyes immediately zeroed in on Aliyah. "Ma'am, your life vest," she snapped. "You need to fasten it properly." Aliyah looked down. The life vest was on, but she wasn't using an extender. She had just loosened the straps to accommodate her baby bump comfortably and safely. It was buckled low across her hips, just as the instructional card had shown. "It is fastened," Aliyah replied calmly, pointing to the buckle. "I've loosened the straps." Karen leaned in, her face uncomfortably close. Her voice dropped to a low, condescending hiss that was somehow louder than a shout. "That's not what I mean. It needs to be tight. It's loose. I can see a gap." She gestured dismissively at the vest. "If we hit rough seas, you'll fly right out of your seat. It needs to be snug against your condition." The word condition dripped with disdain, as if Aliyah's pregnancy was an inconvenience she had brought on board specifically to annoy her. Marcus remained calm. "The vest is fastened as per the instructions provided. Tightening it further would put undue pressure on her abdomen, which is against medical advice for pregnant women." His voice was dangerously quiet, a low rumble of thunder gathering on the horizon. Karen ignored him, her focus entirely on Aliyah. "I don't need a medical lesson from you, sir. I need compliance." "Ma'am," she said, her voice rising in pitch, "I am giving you a direct instruction from a crew member. Tighten your life vest now, or I will have the captain radio ahead and have you escorted off this ship by security for non-compliance." The threat hung in the air, audacious and absurd. Several passengers nearby turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. The student vlogger in seat 35A, a young man who had sensed the drama brewing, discreetly propped, his phone against the armrest, angling the camera just right. He hit record. Aliyah's medical training and natural composure took over. She would not be baited into an argument. "I understand your concern for safety," she began, her tone even and professional. "But let me assure you, this is the safest way for me and the baby to be buckled. The vest is designed to sit low on the hips, not to constrict the stomach. If you'd like, you can consult your own cruise line's guidelines for pregnant passengers." She had not raised her voice. She had not been disrespectful. She had stated facts calmly and clearly, but for Karen Foster, this was not about safety. It was about power. It was about a black woman in a standard cabin daring to question her authority, daring to be intelligent and articulate. In Karen's twisted worldview, Aliyah's calm defiance was the ultimate insolence. "Don't you dare lecture me on my own company's policies," Karen seethed, her face turning a blotchy red. "I've been doing this job since before you were born, little girl. You think you're better than everyone else, sitting here with your fancy talk." "You will do as I say." Karen's carefully constructed dam of professionalism finally burst, releasing a torrent of raw, unfiltered prejudice. She reached down, her hand grabbing the fabric of Aliyah's life vest. "If you're incapable, I'll tighten it for you." Instinctively, Aliyah recoiled, her hands flying to cover her precious belly. "Do not touch me," she exclaimed, her voice finally cracking with alarm. It was a mother's primal instinct to protect her child. And that's when it happened. In a flash of pure, unadulterated malice, Karen Foster's hand snapped back. The sound was a sickening crack that silenced the entire theater. It wasn't just a tap. It was a full, open-palmed slap across Aliyah's face. The force of it jerked Aliyah's head to the side. A collective gasp rippled through the rows of passengers. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The hum of the engine seemed to fade into nothingness. Aliyah's cheek flared with a stinging crimson heat. Tears welled in her eyes, born not of pain, but of sheer, profound shock. In all her life, through all the challenges she had faced, no one had ever laid a hand on her in violence. Time seemed to slow down for Marcus. He saw the movement, the impact, the look of disbelief and hurt on his wife's face. A cold, white-hot rage, an ancient and primal fury he hadn't felt in years, surged through him. It was the rage of a husband, a father-to-be, a man watching the most important person in his world be violated, his body tensed, every muscle coiling. He was a big man. He could have ended the confrontation in a second, but he saw the tears in Aliyah's eyes. He saw her hand trembling as she held it to her cheek, and he knew that unleashing his fury would only terrify her more. It would make them the angry black couple Karen was trying to paint them as. He had to contain the inferno. He rose slowly from his seat, his 6'4" frame seeming to fill the entire aisle, casting a dark shadow over the now trembling steward. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He spoke in a voice that was eerily calm, a voice stripped of all emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "You just assaulted my pregnant wife," he said, each word a perfectly polished stone of ice. "You are going to step back. You are going to go to the galley, and you are not going to speak to her or to me for the remainder of this cruise." Karen, realizing the gravity of what she had done, began to stammer, her bravado instantly evaporating, replaced by a panicked attempt at self-preservation. She was non-compliant. She was aggressive. I felt threatened. The lie was so blatant, so pathetic that a passenger in the row behind them, a man in a business suit, scoffed loudly. "Threatened? Are you kidding me? We all saw it. You slapped her for no reason." "I have it on video," called out the vlogger, holding up his phone. The theater erupted in a low murmur of outrage. The kind steward, Leo, rushed forward, his face pale with horror. "Karen, what did you do?" he whispered, before turning to Aliyah. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can I get you some ice?" Aliyah couldn't speak. She just nodded, still cradling her cheek, her eyes fixed on some distant point, trying to process the violation. Marcus looked at Karen, his dark eyes like chips of obsidian. "Your name is Karen Foster," he stated, not as a question, but as a final judgment. "Remember this moment. Remember it very, very well." He then gently guided Aliyah's head onto his shoulder, murmuring soft reassurances, his large hand shielding her face from the prying eyes of the other passengers. He was no longer just a husband on vacation. He was Marcus Thorne, CEO of Sapphire Seas Cruises, and he had just witnessed one of his employees physically assault a customer, his wife, carrying his child, on his ship. The departure from Port Tay, Everglades was no longer the end of a vacation. It was the beginning of a war. And Karen Foster had just handed the king all the ammunition he would ever need. The last 20 minutes of the drill were suffocatingly tense. Leo, after bringing a makeshift ice pack for Aliyah's cheek, had quietly but firmly insisted Karen remain in the forward galley. The atmosphere in the theater had shifted irrevocably. The quiet disapproval of the other passengers was a palpable force, a silent jury that had already reached its verdict. Whispers rustled through the rows as people shared what they had seen, their phones discreetly passing around the video that had been captured. Aliyah remained quiet, leaning against Marcus, her body trembling with a mixture of shock and adrenaline. The red mark on her cheek was a stark brand against her dark skin. Marcus held her, his mind a maelstrom of controlled fury. His first priority was Aliyah and the baby. He needed to get her off this ship and checked by a doctor. His second priority was ensuring that the poison of Karen Foster's behavior was surgically and completely excised from his company. As the ship was still at the dock, a new announcement came over the intercom. Not from the captain, but from the head steward, a different woman from the forward section. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security issue, we ask that you remain at your muster stations until instructed to do so by port officials. Please do not stand up or retrieve your belongings. Thank you for your cooperation." A groan went through the theater, but Marcus knew what this meant. Karen had followed through on her threat. She had radioed the bridge, not to report her own assault, but to report a non-compliant and aggressive passenger. She was trying to frame Aliyah to save her own skin. It was a desperate, foolish move, but one that protocol would force the authorities to take seriously, at least initially. "Marcus, what's happening?" Aliyah whispered, her voice laced with fear. "She called them," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "She's trying to flip the script. Don't worry. Let them come. Don't say a word. Let me handle it." The gangway was still connected. The engines idled. But instead of the usual cheerful chime and the rush to board, an unnerving silence fell. Then 2 uniformed Port Everglades Authority police officers and a severe-looking man in a suit, a cruise line official, boarded the ship. The official, whose name tag read Terminal Supervisor Miller, held a clipboard. Karen Foster emerged from the forward galley, rushing to meet them. Her face was a carefully composed mask of victimhood. "Thank you for getting here so quickly," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "It's the woman in row 34. She became verbally abusive and belligerent when I tried to enforce safety regulations. She refused to fasten her life vest correctly. When I tried to assist her, she became physical. I was afraid for my safety and the safety of the cabin. It was a masterful performance of lies, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who had done it before." Supervisor Miller nodded grimly, not questioning his senior crew member. "Okay, Karen, point her out." Karen raised a shaking finger and pointed directly at Aliyah. "Her, right there." The 2 police officers started down the aisle, their expressions impassive. Passengers began to protest. "That's not what happened," someone shouted. "She's the one who assaulted her." Another passenger yelled, pointing at Karen. The vlogger stood up, phone in hand. "I have the whole thing on video." "The steward is lying!" The officers held up their hands. "Please, everyone, remain calm. We need the passengers in row 34 to come with us." Marcus stood up, his presence alone commanding attention. "My wife has just been assaulted. She is pregnant and she is in distress. She will not be going anywhere until her doctor has seen her." One of the officers, Officer Davis, addressed him. "Sir, we have a report from the crew. We just need to get your statement. If you'll please come with us to the office, we can sort this out." Marcus knew that arguing with the police on the ship would only escalate the situation and distress Aliyah further. He had to play this carefully. The system was now in motion, and he had to let it run its course for a moment longer before he brought his own immense power to bear. "Fine," Marcus said. He helped Aliyah to her feet, his arms securely around her waist. As they walked down the aisle, he felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on them. It was a walk of shame they did not deserve, orchestrated by the very employee whose salary he paid. Karen Foster stood near the entry door, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had won. She thought her 20 years of seniority and her uniform gave her impenetrable authority. They were led off the ship and into the sterile, impersonal environment of a port security office. Supervisor Miller and the 2 officers accompanied them. Leo, the young steward, had insisted on coming along as a witness, a brave act of defiance against his senior colleague. "Okay," Officer Davis said, pulling out a notepad. "Let's start with your names." "Dr. Aliyah Hayes," Aliyah said, her voice quiet but steady. "And this is my husband, Marcus Thorne." Supervisor Miller scanned his clipboard. "I have a report here from Ms. Foster stating that you, Ms. Hayes, refused a direct crew instruction, creating a safety hazard, and became belligerent." Before Aliyah could respond, Marcus held up a hand. "That report is a complete fabrication. My wife followed all instructions. Ms. Foster was hostile and unprofessional from the moment we boarded. Her hostility escalated until she physically assaulted my wife by slapping her across the face." Leo quickly interjected. "He's telling the truth. I saw it. So did half the theater." Karen was completely out of line. She targeted them from the start. Miller looked from the defiant junior steward to the calm, imposing man in the hoodie. He was in a difficult position. A senior crew member's word against the passengers. Protocol dictated he back his employee. "I understand," Miller said dismissively. "We have your statement now." Standard procedure in a non-compliance incident might involve a fine or, in extreme cases, federal charges. The sheer audacity of the threat made Aliyah flinch. They were being treated like criminals. The victims were being portrayed as the perpetrators. The injustice of it was a physical weight pressing down on her. Marcus listened patiently. He let Miller finish his little speech about maritime authority regulations and the authority of the crew. He let the system show its hand, its biases, its inherent flaws. He wanted to see just how broken it was. When Miller was done, Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull out a wallet full of black cards. He simply looked the supervisor in the eye and said, "You're new here, aren't you, Mr. Miller?" The question caught Miller off guard. I've been the terminal supervisor for 6 months. 6 months? Marcus repeated thoughtfully. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It wasn't a flashy, jewel-encrusted device, just a standard smartphone. He swiped through his contacts, his thumb moving with purpose. "Sir, what are you doing?" Officer Davis asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. "I'm making a phone call," Marcus said calmly. "I believe your protocol allows for that." He found the name he was looking for and pressed the call button. He put the phone on speaker for everyone to hear. It rang once. Robert Vance. A brisk, powerful voice answered. Supervisor Miller's face went pale. Robert Vance was the chief operating officer of Sapphire Seas Cruises. He was a legend in the industry, a figure whose name was spoken with a mixture of terror and reverence in corporate headquarters. "Robert," Marcus said, his voice still perfectly level. "It's Marcus." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, where are you? I thought you were on your way to Aspen." "Change of plans," Marcus said. "I'm in a small security office at Port Everglades Terminal 4. I was on voyage 712. It seems one of your senior stewards, a Karen Foster, just assaulted my wife, and your terminal supervisor, a Mr. Miller, is currently threatening her with federal charges based on Ms. Foster's fabricated report." The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. Supervisor Miller looked as if he had seen a ghost. His jaw was slack and his eyes were wide with dawning, catastrophic horror. The police officers exchanged confused glances. Finally, Robert Vance's voice came back, and it was a completely different beast. The casual briskness was gone, replaced by the sound of pure, concentrated damage control. "Marcus, stay right where you are. Don't say another word to them. I'm at the international terminal. I will be there in 3 minutes. I am calling the head of port operations and the chief of port police right now. Nobody leaves that room. Nobody." The call ended. Marcus Thorne placed his phone face down on the table. He looked at Mr. Miller, whose professional arrogance had dissolved into a puddle of raw panic. He looked at the 2 police officers, who were now staring at him with a newfound and deeply uncertain respect. The power in the room had just shifted. It had shifted so completely, so seismically that the air itself seemed to crackle. The game of protocols and procedures was over. The real king had just moved his first piece. The 3 minutes that followed felt like an eternity. The sterile security office, which moments before had been a stage for Supervisor Miller's petty authority, was now a pressure cooker of anxiety. Miller was sweating profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a trembling hand. He kept opening his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but no words came out. The 2 police officers stood awkwardly by the door. Their entire demeanor had changed. They were no longer dealing with a belligerent passenger in a hoodie. They were dealing with a man who could summon the highest echelons of corporate and port authority with a single phone call. Aliyah, though still shaken, felt a sense of surreal vindication. She watched her husband, who had so successfully hidden his immense power for the sake of normalcy, finally let the mask slip. He wasn't being arrogant or boastful. He was simply using the tools at his disposal to protect his family, when the system designed to do so had failed spectacularly. The door burst open. Robert Vance, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a brutally tailored Italian suit, strode in. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. Behind him were 2 other people, a woman in a sharp business suit who Marcus recognized as Maria Sanchez, the GM of Port Everglades operations for Sapphire Seas, and a high-ranking port police captain whose brass insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Robert's eyes immediately found Marcus and Aliyah. He bypassed everyone else as if they were furniture. "Aliyah, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. He had known the couple for years. "We need to get you to a doctor right away." He then looked at the red mark still visible on her cheek, and his face hardened into granite. He turned his gaze upon Miller. "You!" he snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What the hell happened here?" Miller stammered. "Mr. Vance, sir, I was just following protocol. The crew member reported—" "Your crew member lied!" Leo, the junior steward, blurted out, finding his courage. She slapped Dr. Hayes in the face. "I saw it. Dozens of people saw it." Maria Sanchez, the GM, stepped forward, her iPad already glowing. "Mr. Vance, I'm already getting a flood of emails and social media alerts. A passenger in 35A live-streamed the aftermath and has posted a video of the incident itself. It's already got 10,000 views. The hashtag Dr. Sapphire Seas Assault is starting to trend." Robert Vance looked like he was going to explode. He took a deep breath, reining in his temper. He looked at the police captain. "Captain, my CEO and his pregnant wife were just assaulted by an employee on our ship. Then they were wrongfully detained by your officers based on a false report from the assailant. I want a full and immediate investigation." The captain, now fully grasping the magnitude of the situation, nodded sharply. "Consider it done. Officer Davis, take statements from Mr. Thorne and Dr. Hayes as the victims. Get the contact information for every witness on that cruise, starting with the young man with the video. And someone get Ms. Foster in here, now, as if on cue." Karen Foster walked toward the office, a smug look still on her face. She had been waiting in the gangway, expecting to be praised for her handling of a difficult passenger. She saw the assembly of executives and high-ranking police, and her smugness grew, assuming this was all for show, to intimidate the unruly couple. She stepped into the doorway and began, "Is everything sorted out? I filed my initial report." Her voice trailed off as she saw the scene inside. She saw Supervisor Miller looking physically ill. She saw the police officers looking at her with cold, accusatory eyes. She saw the cruise line's COO, Robert Vance, a man she'd only ever seen in corporate training videos, staring at her with a look of pure loathing. And then she saw the man in the gray hoodie, Marcus Thorne, standing not as a detainee, but as the clear center of gravity around which this entire storm was swirling. Recognition, followed by sheer, soul-crushing terror, washed over her. She had seen his picture before, years ago, in an orientation packet. The founder and CEO, the man who signed every one of her paychecks, the man whose company philosophy she had just spat on before assaulting his wife. The color drained from her face. Her legs felt weak. The world tilted on its axis. "Ms. Foster," Robert Vance said, his voice lethally soft, "Mr. Thorne here is our CEO. You just assaulted his wife, Dr. Hayes. You then filed a false report with port authorities. You have brought unimaginable disgrace upon this cruise line and yourself. On behalf of Sapphire Seas Cruises, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending termination. The police captain here would like a word with you regarding a potential charge of felony assault." Karen swayed, grabbing the door frame for support. "No," she whispered, her mind refusing to process the reality. "No, I didn't know." Marcus finally spoke, his voice resonating with cold, hard authority. "That's the entire point, Ms. Foster. It shouldn't matter who I am. It shouldn't matter who my wife is. You shouldn't have to know someone is the owner of the company to treat them with basic human decency and respect. You should do it because they are a human being, a passenger who entrusted their safety to you, a pregnant woman. You failed on every single level, not just as an employee, but as a person." He then turned to his COO. "Robert, I want this handled by the book, but I want it handled mercilessly. I want our entire training program for customer-facing employees, from top to bottom, gutted and rebuilt. I want a zero-tolerance policy for prejudice of any kind, with immediate termination as the only outcome. I want Leo here," he said, nodding to the pale but resolute junior steward, "to be commended for his integrity. And I want a corporate team to contact every single passenger on Voyage 712, apologize personally, and issue them a full refund and a voucher for future travel. We will not hide from this. We will own it." He then looked at the now sobbing Karen Foster with a final dismissive glance. The power had not just been inverted. It had been brought down like an avalanche, burying her and the ugly prejudice she represented. "Get her out of my sight," Marcus commanded. He then wrapped a protective arm around Aliyah. "Let's go, honey. Let's get you checked out." As they walked out of the office, leaving a scene of corporate and legal carnage in their wake, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle. It was more than just a bad cruise. It was a moment that would change the course of their lives, and the very culture of the cruise line Marcus had built from the ground up. The public reckoning was only just beginning. By the time Marcus and Aliyah left the port, escorted by a silent, apologetic police captain to a private car summoned by Robert, the video was no longer a minor trend. It was a raging inferno. The student vlogger who had filmed the incident had uploaded the full, unedited clip under the title, Sapphire Seas Steward Slaps Pregnant Black Woman, Voyage 712. The footage was damning. It captured Karen's condescending tone, Aliyah's calm responses, Marcus's quiet defense, and the shocking, violent slap. It then showed the immediate, outraged reactions of the other passengers. It was a perfect, self-contained narrative of corporate failure and racial prejudice. The internet did what the internet does. The video was mirrored, shared, and reposted across every platform. Major news outlets picked it up. By evening, it was the lead story on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Karen Foster's name and face were everywhere, making her the unwilling poster child for racism on the high seas. Commentators debated it, celebrities condemned it, and Sapphire Seas Cruises stock began to tremble in after-hours trading. Marcus and Aliyah spent the evening in a private hospital suite, where a team of doctors confirmed that both she and the baby were physically unharmed, though Aliyah was emotionally exhausted and deeply distressed. Lying in the quiet room, watching the news coverage on a muted television, the reality of their new public role in a national conversation began to sink in. "I didn't want this," Aliyah whispered, her hand resting on her stomach. "I didn't want our baby brought into a world where this is the headline." Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, holding her hand. "I know, but we didn't choose this. She did, Karen Foster did, and now that it's out there, we have a choice. We can hide from it, or we can use it." Meanwhile, at Sapphire Seas Cruises corporate headquarters in Miami, it was all hands on deck. The boardroom, usually dark at this hour, was lit up like a Christmas tree. Robert Vance was marshalling his forces, working in lockstep with the company's formidable head of human resources, Eleanor Dawson, and their public relations team. Eleanor Dawson was a sharp, no-nonsense black woman in her 60s who had seen it all. She had fought her way up the corporate ladder and had zero tolerance for the kind of behavior Karen Foster had displayed. She immediately pulled Karen's file. What she found was a disgrace. Over the past 5 years, Karen Foster had accumulated a dozen passenger complaints, many of them citing rudeness and an aggressive attitude. 3 of those complaints were from non-white passengers, who explicitly mentioned feeling racially targeted. In each case, Karen had been given a slap on the wrist, a mandatory refresher course on customer service, and sent back to work. Her seniority and her union representative had protected her. The system hadn't just failed on Voyage 712, it had been failing for years. Karen wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom of a deep systemic rot. "This is unacceptable," Eleanor said, slapping the file down on the boardroom table. "This woman should have been fired 3 years ago after the incident with the family from Mumbai. The supervisors who let this slide, who just passed her along, they're culpable too," Robert agreed. "Marcus wants the whole system torn down and rebuilt. He wants this to be a defining moment for the company, not the one that destroys it." The first step was a public statement. It couldn't be the usual corporate speak apology. It had to be direct, honest, and brutal. After a brief call with Marcus, they drafted a press release that was sent out just before midnight. It read, "Tonight, on Sapphire Seas Cruises Voyage 712, a member of our crew committed a heinous and unforgivable act of violence and prejudice against a passenger. The passenger, Dr. Aliyah Hayes, was physically assaulted. There is no excuse, no justification, and no context that makes this behavior acceptable. It is a failure of the highest order, and we are holding ourselves fully accountable. The employee in question, Karen Foster, has been terminated, effective immediately." Sapphire Seas Cruises is fully cooperating with law enforcement in their assault investigation against her. But her termination is not enough. This incident has revealed a systemic failure within our organization. We are launching an immediate top-to-bottom review of our hiring, training, and complaint resolution processes, to be overseen by an independent civil rights firm. We failed Dr. Hayes, her husband, Mr. Thorne, and every passenger on that cruise. We promise to do more than just apologize. We will change. The statement, notable for naming the employee and for its unvarnished self-condemnation, sent another shockwave through the media. It was a masterstroke of crisis management because it was rooted in genuine intent, dictated by a CEO who had witnessed the failure firsthand. The next morning, Eleanor Dawson began the internal purge. Supervisor Miller, the terminal supervisor who had tried to intimidate Aliyah and Marcus, was fired. The regional manager who had overseen Karen Foster's division and ignored the pattern of complaints was also terminated. A clear message was sent through the ranks. Incompetence and prejudice would no longer be tolerated or protected by bureaucracy. Leo, the junior steward, was brought into headquarters. He was terrified, expecting to be reprimanded for breaking rank. Instead, he found himself in Eleanor Dawson's office with Robert Vance present. "Leo?" Eleanor began, her stern expression softening slightly. "We've reviewed your statement and the testimony of numerous passengers. You acted with integrity and compassion in an impossible situation. You upheld the values of this company when your senior officer did not. We want to thank you." Robert slid a letter across the desk. "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to head steward. We're also giving you a significant bonus and assigning you to a new task force responsible for redesigning our in-service customer service training. We need more people like you." Leo was stunned, tears welling in his eyes. In the midst of a corporate nightmare, they were taking the time to reward the one person who had done the right thing. The corporate reckoning was swift and decisive. But for Karen Foster, the true karma, the deeply personal and life-altering consequences of her actions, was just beginning to unfold. The viral storm had made her infamous, and now the rest of her life was about to be swept away by the winds she herself had sown. For Karen Foster, the world ended not with a bang, but with a viral video and a single devastating phone call from Human Resources formally notifying her of her termination. She was a pariah. Her name, her face, her act of petty violence were now global symbols of racism. The life she had meticulously, if bitterly, built over 53 years, began to unravel with terrifying speed. First came the legal consequences. The Miami District Attorney's Office, spurred by the overwhelming video evidence and public outcry, formally charged her with assault. It wasn't a mere misdemeanor. Given that the act occurred on a ship, a federal jurisdiction, and against a pregnant woman, the charges were elevated. Her union, which had protected her for years, publicly condemned her actions and offered only the most basic legal aid, distancing themselves as quickly as possible. She was facing potential jail time. Then came the financial ruin. Fired from a job she'd held for over 2 decades, she lost her salary, her health insurance, and her travel benefits. Her pension, which she was just a few years away from collecting, was now in jeopardy. The meager savings she had were quickly devoured by legal fees. The divorce had already left her in a precarious financial state. This pushed her over the edge into a chasm of debt, from which there was no escape. She had to sell her small condo in a panic, moving into a dingy one-room apartment. But the most profound consequence was the social ostracization. She was radioactive. Friends she had known for years stopped answering her calls. Former colleagues blocked her number. The neighborhood where she had lived, once a place of quiet anonymity, became a prison. People recognized her in the grocery store, whispering and pointing. Some were openly hostile, shouting racist at her from across the parking lot. She became a prisoner in her own home, the blinds drawn, terrified to go outside. The media was relentless. Journalists camped outside her apartment building. Tabloid reporters dug into every corner of her life, unearthing her financial troubles, her messy divorce, and the previous complaints filed against her at the cruise line. They painted a picture not of a monster, but of something almost worse. A pathetic, bitter woman whose deep-seated prejudices, fueled by personal failures, had finally erupted in a pathetic act of violence. There was no sympathy for her. One evening, desperate and alone, she called her estranged sister, the only family she had left. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," she sobbed into the phone. "My life is over. It was one mistake, one moment of stress." Her sister's reply was cold and sharp. "One mistake? No, Karen, this is who you've always been. I've heard your little comments for years. The way you talk about people who aren't like you. The resentment. The bitterness. What happened on that ship wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. It was the real you for the whole world to see. You weren't stressed. You were hateful. You just happened to do it to the one person on Earth who could hold you accountable in a way no one else ever could." The call ended. The final bridge had been burned. This was the hard karma Aliyah and Marcus had never asked for, but which the universe, in its own brutal calculus, had delivered. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was the complete and total demolition of a life built on a rotten foundation of prejudice and resentment. Karen had spent years cultivating a tiny, pathetic kingdom in the aisle of a cruise ship, where her uniform gave her a sliver of power over others. She had used that power not to serve, but to bully, and her final act of tyranny was against the one person whose husband owned the entire world she inhabited. While Karen's life imploded, Marcus and Aliyah were navigating a different kind of fallout. They were inundated with media requests and messages of support. They chose to give one exclusive interview to a respected journalist. On national television, Aliyah spoke with the same poise and grace she had shown on the ship. "This was never about revenge for me," she said, her hand resting on her belly. "It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else. A person's dignity should not be dependent on their stateroom number or the color of their skin. What happened to me was ugly and shocking, but the real tragedy is that it happens every day in less dramatic ways to people who don't have a voice, who don't have a video, and who aren't married to the CEO of the cruise line." Marcus, sitting beside her, announced the formation of the Sapphire Seas Cruises Foundation for Dignity and Travel, funded with a $50 million personal endowment. Its mission was to partner with civil rights organizations to combat discrimination in the travel industry, fund diversity and inclusion training programs, and provide legal aid to victims of prejudice. They were turning their trauma into a catalyst for change. They were using their immense power and privilege not for retribution, but for reconstruction. The contrast between their response and Karen's self-destruction could not have been more stark. She had been consumed by her hatred, while they were transforming it into a legacy of progress. Karen Foster eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, avoiding jail time but receiving lengthy probation and a permanent criminal record that made her unemployable in any customer-facing industry. The last anyone heard, she was working a night shift, stocking shelves at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, anonymous, invisible, and stripped of the uniform and authority that had been the only sources of pride in her hollow life. Her name became a cautionary tale in cruise line training manuals, a verb for the ultimate career suicide. She hadn't just been fired, she had been erased. 6 months after the incident on Voyage 712, the world had, for the most part, moved on. The news cycle had churned through a dozen other outrages, and the Tanker Sapphire Seas assault was a distant memory. But for the people at the center of the storm, the changes were permanent and profound. Sapphire Seas Cruises was a transformed company. The Dignity and Travel Initiative had become the new backbone of its corporate identity. The independent civil rights firm Marcus had hired had completed its audit, and its recommendations were implemented without hesitation. The entire senior management team had to undergo intensive anti-bias training. Hiring practices were overhauled to prioritize empathy and emotional intelligence as much as technical skill. A new anonymous complaint system routed directly to Eleanor Dawson's office was created, empowering both employees and passengers to report misconduct without fear of retribution. The company's reputation, after the initial staggering blow, had slowly and steadily recovered. They had not run from the scandal. They had embraced it as a crucible. They were now seen as a leader in corporate accountability. Their stock price had rebounded and surpassed its previous highs. Marcus Thorne's handling of the crisis was being taught as a case study in business schools. Leo, the young steward, was thriving. His role on the new training task force had given him a purpose he'd never imagined. He traveled the country speaking to new hires. Using the story of Voyage 712, and his small part in it as a powerful lesson in integrity. He was a living example of the company's new ethos: do the right thing, especially when it's hard. On a warm spring afternoon in Fort Lauderdale, Aliyah Hayes lay in a hospital bed, not as a patient in distress, but as a new mother. Cradled in her arms, wrapped in a soft white blanket, was her son, Julian Hayes Thorne. He was healthy, beautiful, and blessedly unaware of the turbulence that had preceded his arrival. Marcus sat by the bed, his finger captured in his son's tiny, impossibly strong grip. The anger he had felt on that ship, the cold, protective rage, was gone, replaced by a wave of love so vast it felt infinite. He looked at Aliyah, her face glowing with a tired but blissful radiance, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would have burned the world down for them. But he was glad he hadn't had to. Instead, he was helping to rebuild a small piece of it. "He looks like you," Aliyah whispered. Smiling, "He has your strength," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, as Julian slept peacefully in a bassinet beside the bed, Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling city lights. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert Vance. It was a photo of the first graduating class of stewards from the new training program. They were a diverse, bright-eyed group, and in the center of the photo, beaming, was their instructor, Leo. A single act of malice on a Tuesday afternoon cruise had set off a chain reaction of consequences that no one could have predicted. It had destroyed one life built on bitterness and, in a strange and powerful way, had enriched and redefined countless others. It had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. Marcus put his phone away and went back to his wife's side. He placed a gentle hand on his son's head. This was all that mattered. The boardrooms, the stock prices, the headlines, they were all just tools to build a world safe enough for this tiny, perfect life. The voyage had been a nightmare, but the final arrival here in this quiet room was peaceful. They were home, and they were just beginning. This story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't the power they wield, but how they treat those they believe have none. Karen Foster's prejudice led to her downfall, but it was the quiet dignity of Dr. Aliyah Hayes and the decisive, responsible actions of Marcus Thorne that truly defined the outcome. It shows us that karma isn't always a mystical force. Sometimes it's a direct result of our choices colliding with a reality we can't see. The world is full of hidden kings and queens, people of immense character and influence traveling among us. How we treat them, and everyone else, is a reflection of who we truly are. If this story of justice, accountability, and the incredible power of doing the right thing resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas and powerful stories. Thank you for listening.